Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Highlights from this week. This is our show where I discuss news that intrigued me this week. So let's get started. So the first topic that we need to discuss is about an app that Google released. This app is called the Personal Safety app, and it's basically a app that lets you stay in contact with your loved ones and kind of know where they are. This is mainly good for parents who want to monitor their children, but it's also good for husbands and wives or what have you. Essentially, you can have all your family members who have phones on the single app and give them access to your location and let them know you're safe in case of any emergency. At the same time, if you are a parent and you want to know where your child is, you can request for their location, and the phone gives them 5 minutes to either say okay and give your location, or say no and not share your location. And within the 5 minutes, if you don't respond, then the app will automatically send your parents your location. So in a way, it'll provide information to your parents or whoever's tracking you based on your location, based on whether or not you respond. So it's really important that this be used kind of with trusted people, because it can be very easily taken advantage of. I mean, you are kind of giving away your exact location. But since this app is by Google, you could kind of give it the same amount of trust you give any other Google apps. It's not going to be sharing your location with other people. And the location sharing services, I think the same privacy concerns that other apps have will be followed. The main thing here is that it's going to be sharing your information whether or not you want them to. So unless you directly say don't share my location, it's going to share it within 5 minutes. And that's where, if you have a concern, you're going to probably not want to get this app. Otherwise, for a parent who's always worrying about where your child is, I think this is a great app, because you can essentially a request for their location, or they can say no and then give a message as to why they don't want to share their location. But they could just be like, I'm busy right now, but I'll be home soon, or whatever. So either way, it's a great app, and I think it does a better job than the Google Device Finder, because I think that's what a lot of people have been using so far, just to keep track of their family members. That's meant to be used in a more personal manner, to just keep track of your personal devices, whereas this will actually help you keep track of your family and loved ones. So from there on, we'll move on to something that has to do with travel, specifically that United Airlines will soon charge extra fees for use of overhead bins. I'm not sure how you're going to feel about this. There's going to be two camps generally when it comes to this. People do travel short distances for like business purposes and stuff like that, and for those people, overhead bins are not really necessary. They only carry usually a briefcase, and they get around and without actually having to carry things with them. But for anybody else who actually uses overhead bins, keep in mind that this is not checking luggage. You're not paying for storage of personal items in the cargo area. This is for those bins that come right above your seat. So not being allowed to use those bins without paying a fee kind of seems like a really additional extra charge that they're charging you, but they're making it look like it's a lower fee for the ticket. Right now, it's only United that's doing this, but again, if this becomes popular and people do, go for cheaper fares, without knowing about the consequences of it, it's gonna spread out into other airlines too, and other budget airlines are soon gonna start charging the same things. So if it even seems slightly successful, other airlines will definitely do this, because in terms of weight, in terms of fuel, it's gonna save them a lot more money. And at the very least, if people are going to be carrying luggages with them, they're going to have to end up paying for that additional space that they're going to need now, and not knowing that it's going to happen. And there's been a lot of problems that has happened already in airports for the same thing, but for checking baggage, additional fees of like $100 have been added to people's tickets just because they brought baggage when they weren't supposed to bring baggage. And I can imagine this will be a lot worse because people automatically assume that you can have at least one carry-on item with you, that you could just keep it up there in the baggage hold. Especially with people's personal items being destroyed in when you check them. This is something that a lot of people do all the time. So there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be angry, and there's going to be people who are just going to pay that extra fee and just forget about it. So it's going to be it depends on what camp you fall under. But if this is any type of long range flight, it's going to suck because you're definitely going to have some sort of big baggage, and you don't want to keep it at your feet for the entire flight. With that said, the other issue is that this is going to be a really bad hassle for the flight crew. I'm pretty sure flight attendants are going to have to deal with people being really angry on airplanes, finding out that people with only specific tags on their bags can actually put their bags on top, and other people putting it up without knowing and getting yelled at, having it taken off. It's going to cause a lot more hassle for flight crews as well, and we'll only be able to see exactly what happens after these guys actually end up using these rules that they're currently talking about. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And if people really don't want this, I think the best way they can do that is by not going on those flights that are currently implementing that, and letting your wallets talk rather than just yelling at them. Because I think in the main scheme of things, it's the bottom line that really matters. Next, we have some good news from Google. They're kind of planning on running their entire company on renewable energy starting 2017. That's not a really far away thing anymore. If you think about it, this is December of 2016 already. So basically within next year, Google is going to be running 100% on renewable energy. Now, the way they're doing this isn't exactly, having their own solar farms and stuff on house and running everything like that, but they're going to be doing this by doing some carbon offsets. So they're going to be promoting green energy, so solar, wind, what have you, and they'll be paying for those companies to expand their resources so that basically whatever data center or building that they have in that grid will be using power coming from that grid that offsets the energy that they've generated. So by doing this, they'll be carbon neutral, and this is really big because Google, especially their data centers, which I was actually more surprised about, use a ton of power. Even though they're really efficient, they still use a lot of power. And by doing this, they're actually saying that they're taking steps towards reducing carbon emissions and are actually trying to be more green. So, hats off to them for that. Next, earlier this week, Amazon Amazon announced that they're going to start a new store called Amazon Go, and it's going to be a grocery store. The cool thing about these grocery stores is that it's not going to be like a traditional grocery store where you have a cart, you gather items and wait in line, pay for the items, and so on. Amazon Go will pretty much be just a walk-in, walk-out type of store with no lines, no cashier, no anything. It's gonna handle all this through essentially a barcode or a QR code on your phone that you scan when you're entering. And once you enter the store, it'll just track you wherever you go, use cameras and other techniques to know what items you are getting, what items you pick up or even put back if you don't need them. And based on that information, they will actually basically charge your phone, your app, your credit card, whatever you have already connected to Amazon. And all you do is pick up the items you need and just walk out of the store. There's no lines, no waiting, no nothing, which is really interesting. Um, it brings up a few questions, and I don't see it being answered. There is a video, if you guys want, just check it out. I'll leave the links in the description. But it does leave some questions for me. For me, this seems like a great idea if you're thinking about um something like a convenience store, because convenience stores are more one item, two item. It's a quick purchase, and it's something you do on the go. For me, I don't see grocery stores being the same thing, because in grocery stores you usually buy a lot of stuff. Most people will go once a week or once every 2 weeks or so to the grocery store and get all the stuff they need for that entire time period. And I don't see people doing that here. I don't know. I haven't seen the use of carts in any of these videos or anything like that, or like large bags. But if you're going to be picking up a ton of stuff, this may not really work out. I'm not really sure how they'll do it, because in those checkout lines is where you usually take those items, put them into bags, and then you carry the bags out of the store. Now, if there's no checkout lines, then you're essentially going to have that step somewhere else. So I don't know. It seems like a great idea and it sounds super cool. And I hope they find an easier way so that there's no lineup waiting to get into the store for people to scan their apps, or trying to figure out how to get this done when you've never used an Amazon Go store before. So for people who don't have Amazon accounts or anything like that, there's going to be a problem again, because you won't be able to buy anything in the store without your phone. So there's definitely going to be some hurdles to get over, but it's really interesting what they're doing here, and I kind of want to see where it's going to go. I'm pretty sure this is not going to come anywhere near me, since I don't live in any major city in the US. So I'm pretty sure somewhere in California or New York, this store is going to come out, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with it, and then how they're going to implement it in smaller suburban areas where people go for their weekly or monthly grocery shopping at once and buy a bunch of stuff. Next news we have is actually kind of a rumor, so I'm not really sure what's gonna happen there, but it appears that the Galaxy S8 from Samsung may not have a headphone jack. Now, I'm not sure how to feel about this. I've already spoken my opinion on how I felt about the iPhone doing this. I didn't really support it, because the headphone jack really didn't pose a massive problem, in my opinion, to the device itself. It was still useful. It wasn't an old technology. I mean, the technology itself may be old, but the thing is, there isn't anything that can easily replace it that isn't more of a hassle to the people. Right now, there isn't that. It's usually when technology passes that step, that's when people need to consider, adopting the newer technologies. But currently, there aren't any wireless headphones that can last a really long time. I'm talking multiple days, and provide the same quality that a wired headphone does. And any wired headphones that you want for these types of phones are going to have the USB-C jack in order to use the headphones. And then you also have the other problem of charging. So I don't know. People are going to have the same issue that they had. Anybody who had the issue with Apple, now they're going to have the same issue with Samsung. I don't know exactly what they're doing. I know they joked about Apple removing the headphone jack in their Note 7 introduction event that they had. I'm guessing they kind of forgot about it now, or they're completely ignoring that the Note 7 even existed now because of all the problems they had with that. But if they do end up actually doing this and removing the headphone jack, it's going to be interesting, because I don't know, a lot of people, I think, gave shit to Apple for this, and if those same people should give Samsung the same amount of shit, and I think I will definitely be one of those people who are going to be strongly recommending against Samsung for doing something like that, because it's not necessary. As of now, the phones don't need to get any thinner, because the thinner they get, the crappier the battery life becomes, and that's just pointless. So hopefully they're going to learn from either from just the public's reception right now, or they're going to learn from later on when people stop buying their devices. But either way, we'll see what happens when they eventually release this device in, I think, 2 more months or so, probably around February. That's when they're going to announce it. So we'll see what actually ends up happening. Keep in mind, this is a rumor, even though this is on a bit more of a trustworthy site in terms of Samsung news. But still, it is a rumor, so we'll have to wait and see if it's going to be true. But keep in mind that the Apple thing was also a rumor, and it ended up being true. So, yeah, pretty weird. And on that same note, talk about the Galaxy Note 7. You see what I did there? Anyway, so Samsung, as you may remember, has been kind of collecting all their Note 7s. They've been recalling them. They've been trying to get all their customers to return these devices because there has been a threat of the batteries exploding and phones catching on fire and property damage and all that stuff. So they have been recalling it, but turns out about 285,000 phones are still unaccounted for. So there's that many phones that are still out there in people's hands or being sold or whatever, and have the potential of catching on fire, which is kind of a threat to whoever has them. Now, because of this and the fact that people aren't returning them anymore, Samsung is planning on disabling the remaining devices that are out there through firmware updates. Now, first, the fact that they can do that again is kind of really scary in how advanced tech has become, where the company that manufactures the tech can now easily shut it down from a remote place, and you have no control over what they can do. So in that sense, pretty much anything you buy with that much advanced tech inside, you technically don't own it anymore because they can just shut it down from anywhere. But with that said, it is dangerous for people to have this, and it can cause threats to people's lives. So I would recommend, if you have one, to get it in there and just get a different phone. I know they haven't been that nice in terms of the actual swap, but it's gonna be better just not to have that flaming brick in your hand. The other thing that this update is gonna do is it's also gonna reduce the battery percentage to 15%. So once it goes below that 15%, when you're charging it up, it won't charge beyond 15%. That's just to prevent you from using it even without the network connectivity. They just want you to stop using it. That's mainly what they're doing. They will, however, allow you to use 911 calls. So 911 access will continue to work, which is, I guess, one good thing. Now these updates are gonna be pushed through most carriers. Some carriers are refusing to do this right away because of the holidays. They want people to be able to use their devices to contact family and so on. So some of these phones will stay up until after the holidays. But overall, I think all the Note 7s are going to get shut down eventually unless they're not connected to a network. And whatever remaining Note 7s are just going to be parts of history that aren't really talked about anymore. Anyway, that is the news from Samsung. Next, let's talk about mobile devices from Microsoft. Specifically, we're talking about Windows 10 devices. So they haven't announced any actual devices coming out yet, but they're set to be talking about making Windows 10 run on Qualcomm Snapdragon processors. So this is basically Windows that will run on ARM-based processors. This is big because right now, as you know, Windows runs mainly on Intel processors, and the Intel, the chipsets that they're using is different from ARM, and ARM is currently what runs on most mobile devices, most phones, anything that runs Android and so on uses ARM-based processors. So with this switch, Windows can now run on mobile devices, and you can use any Windows app you use on your PC on your mobile phone, as long as they're 32-bit versions. This seems kind of like a big deal because we're talking about the full official Windows 10 running on a mobile device, like a phone, and running the same Windows PC apps on your mobile device. So it's not an app you're running an actual application, which is really cool. I think it's going to be very useful for people who are on the go but who want access to stuff they've been working on. For example, if you're using like Photoshop or Eclipse, some sort of program that you use on Windows that you want to use on a mobile device, now you could just use the Windows version of that on your mobile device and have access to your work really easily, really fast. This will be really useful for people who want to take their work on the go but are unable to do so with the current mobile operating systems because of their limited capabilities in some sense. This will be great, and I think the biggest part that I'm interested about this is the fact that this will mean mobile architecture will actually in the future also move towards 64-bit architecture. Right now, I think Apple made the transition, and I think a few other companies also did as well. And after they switched to 64-bit architecture, they could finally support more RAM, and because of that, they can have heavier apps running on the mobile devices. So we're going to slowly see that happening, and I think eventually PCs and mobile devices are going to be running the same operating system, which would be pretty cool. Although I think there is going to be a need to recompile Windows itself to be compatible, but apps themselves will probably run in some sort of container and work fine. And next, we're going to talk about virtual reality. So it appears that finally we're going to get some good news on the VR side, or at least hopefully. This news basically means that there's going to be companies that are currently making VR. So the main two are HTC, who's making the Vive, and Facebook, who's making the Oculus. They bought it. Along with Acer, Google, Samsung, and Sony. All of these companies are getting together to create a global regulatory body for VR industry standards. So this is pretty cool. They're going to be calling it GVRA, Global Virtual Reality Association, and this association will basically regulate the standards that all virtual reality should follow. Any devices that come for virtual reality, at least. And this is really interesting because right now the biggest hill that virtual reality had to climb was the fact that everybody was making their own little devices with different specifications. Nobody had a really unified way of looking at it, and that made a problem because Samsung was off to the side making Galaxy Gear, which were handheld virtual reality headsets that you put your phone into and use, which don't have necessarily the same abilities that something like the HTC Vive has, which has much more of an in-depth feeling when you're using it. So by seeing that Google, HTC, Oculus, and even Samsung getting together and coming up with a universal standard, this will push the virtual reality industry forward, because now finally everybody's going to follow the same guidelines, everybody's going to use the same standards. So even a Galaxy Gear device will have that same feeling that something like a Oculus has. And this is good because it doesn't turn off consumers who may have used a cheaper quality virtual reality device. I think that's the biggest problem, because some of these devices, like the ones that Samsung makes, are much easier to purchase. So any consumer who wants to get into virtual reality is probably going to purchase a cheaper one first to see if they enjoy it. And if they do, then they may get into a higher quality device that costs more, upwards of $1,000. So by creating this alliance, they're going to be coming up with standards that are actually going to make it so that they can have devices that meet a certain specification, and also that way they can have games and other content made for these devices, and it'll work on all of the devices. And I'm really looking forward to this. I'm really hoping that this is going to make virtual reality actually successful, because I actually want to see this implemented in future versions of handsets and hardware that they're going to be releasing. Now, the only concern with this is that Microsoft is not on this association, in this group of people, and there's one problem with that, and that's the fact that Microsoft is currently the largest PC software maker, Windows, and because of that, they have probably the biggest platform, and because of this, they have the biggest outreach. So whatever standards these guys come up with, if Windows supports it fully, then it's gonna grow much faster than you can imagine. Whereas if it doesn't support it, and Microsoft goes with their own specific thing, which we know they're doing, they're making their own virtual reality headsets and all that stuff right now. So if they're gonna go in their own way, and this is gonna go in their own way, this may become a problem, and eventually one of the two may die out. I'm not sure what's gonna happen, and my bigger concern is that it's gonna turn off consumers. But I really hope that they can come to some sort of understanding, and eventually maybe Microsoft also join the same association, and that way everybody makes devices to a set standard, and that way everybody can enjoy the experience rather than having to deal with who has the better devices and who has better hardware, who has better games and all that stuff. Otherwise it's gonna end up being a battle of Xbox versus PlayStation, and I really don't want to have to deal with another one of those types of battles. And the last newsworthy article we have for this week is about Michigan, the state in the United States, approving cars without drivers or steering wheels on its roads, which is super awesome. So this is about autonomous driving, and as you may know, currently cars are being tested for autonomous driving, but right now the only cars that are legally allowed to be on the road that drive autonomously are the ones that are done by manufacturers. So manufacturers have to get a license to test out their vehicles on the road, and none of these vehicles are allowed to go on the road without a driver sitting behind the wheel. Now, what Michigan has done is they've actually passed laws that allow people to essentially have cars on the road that physically don't even have a steering wheel. So even if there was a person there, nobody can really control it. So it is 100% driven by the cars and the car's AI. But also you can have cars without drivers at all, which is awesome. Basically, you could just imagine a car driving around with nobody inside. And the law allows for that, which is great. I think this is gonna allow more and more companies to actually go to Michigan, test out their hardware, actually give it to the public, let people use it, and this will allow Michigan to be one of the leaders in autonomous driving. I think they were a leader when cars first started with Ford, and they were I think they're trying to bring that back to their state. They're trying to bring another first for cars into their state, with the mass production of autonomous vehicles in the future. So the right now for autonomous driving, regulation is the biggest problem. The hardest thing for companies to make autonomous vehicles is having to deal with the laws that regulate them. The laws really don't allow you to not be in the vehicle at all, and even when you're in the vehicle, there has to be a legal driver, somebody who with a license, sitting in that vehicle, being ready to take control of the vehicle. by having laws that say you don't need a driver and you don't need a steering wheel, you could finally stretch those boundaries and have vehicles that are fully autonomous on the street. And I look forward to a world where that's the case, because I hope that we're going to get to a place where all cars are like that and there's not going to be any more traffic incidents or accidents, people dying of, avoidable deaths due to cars, all that happening. And I think Michigan's taken a massive step forward in that regard. So hopefully this regulation will also set a precedent and will help other states and eventually other countries also take the same step towards autonomous cars and allow autonomous cars on their streets as well. So finally, I have a new segment called Pick of the Week, and this pick is about just a video or anything that really interested me this week. And the pick of the week for this week is a video on the evolution of humanity. So, as humanity has grown over time, and let me just play this quickly and show you. Basically, this video shows you how we as the human race has become more than 7 billion individuals through time, and it visualizes not sure why it stopped, and it visualizes humanity's population and how it exploded throughout the world, and it shows how much it grew exponentially in the recent years. So I'm just going to show you the beginning. As you can see, that kind of shows you how we started in Africa and spread out around the world, and kind of shows you at the bottom how many people, the time, and then how many people on the y-axis. And it's really cool how seeing how we grew to be 7 billion and how fast we grew in the last couple decades compared to thousands of years before that. Anyway, this video will also be in the description, so if you want to actually take a look at this, please do so. You can find it in the description. It's a really interesting video, and that's why I have it as the pick of the week. Anyway, guys, that brings us to the end of this week's news roundup. That concludes all the topics for this week's show. We would love to hear from you on your opinions on any of today's topics. So please remember to leave a comment or contact us through any of our social network accounts. You can also use those platforms to suggest interesting topics for future shows. As always, please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and check out our other videos. Until next time, everyone, peace.